This is Table Top Babble, and I'm Amber. Heyo! This episode was technically supposed to be a Tabletop Spotlight one, but man, my brain is exhausted. I haven't really been able to make the time, nor do I have the mental energy right now to read a new RPG. But hey, you know what? It's a perfect time to get to know a co-host of the show. So on March 30th, I attempted to interview Kenny, also known as Wolfmere, the co-host of Tabletop Babble, the Blue Mage of Red Mage, Blue Mage, and Geekspective's one and only quote-unquote intern. Kenny is one of my favorite humans and podcasting project partners, and it was really fun to talk about his gaming history, writing, Death Trap Dungeons, how we both kind of got our start in them and grew in them, and then also, do some reminiscing together. So without further ado, here's that recording, which I tried to keep it together for. Why is this so hard for me to start? Why? Okay, I have been struggling to start this podcast episode for the last 20 seconds because it's Kenny. Kenny is here today, and it's so weird and strange because we already do 15 podcasts together. We're close.
Yeah, I would say we're dear.
Oh, we're dear close friends.
I think if we were in, sort of a pre-revolutionary setting and there was a war on, we would write each other.
Oh yeah, definitely. My dearest Kenneth, welcome to my podcast, where I've invited you on so that you can talk about the things that you do in the games industry.
Dearest Amber, I podcast with you always.
Exactly. So yeah, it's weird starting a podcast interview show with you because we spend so much time already as is together. But I know all about you, but others may not. And as the co-host of Tabletop Babble, I thought it would be good to have you on to showcase who you are a bit. You did so for me, and you did a way better job than I'm currently doing.
I disagree. This is great. It's great for me.
Sure, because you like seeing me be anxious and sweat and nervous. So
I like watching you squirm.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah, I'm squirming over here. So anyway, hey Kenny, what's up?
Hey, nothing much. It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. Now I got to do that rigmarole. So, Kenny, tell Tabletop Babble listeners who you are. What's up? What's your deal?
Hi, everybody. I'm Kenny. I'm on Twitter at Wolfmere. I do RPGs and MTGs. I like magic. I like role-playing games. That's what I do. I am the premier intern for Geekspective. I think as an intern, I've climbed pretty high. I feel like I am very quickly approaching Wormtongue, Jafar kind of levels of influence in the system, and it won't be long before I make my finishing blow to the organization, a coup. Oh, you should cut that so Josh can't hear that.
Oh no, I'm gonna leave it in. So is Josh the Sultan in this analogy?
Yeah, it's like I'm your right-hand man, and you and I, as father and son, can rule the galaxy of Geekspective once we overthrow Josh.
So you're trying to tell me I should overthrow Dave and Josh,
yeah,
and rule with you?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we could do it.
Well, I would like to know, what's the benefits that you're going to bring to this this establishment, this new world Geekspective order.
Full dental.
Dang.
401k with matching.
How high of a match?
I will go full match.
Okay, cool. I like that. That's amazing.
I rest my case. I think that's enough.
Well, considering everything is 0 across the board right now, it's not really that enticing of a prospect. Also, side note, I just looked at the email I sent you. with the questions, and I gotta say it's probably the least professional document I've ever sent.
Yeah, if we weren't already in a business relationship, I would question if I wanted to come up on this show. I know this is not what everybody else gets.
No, it is absolutely not. Look, you're special as a premier Geekspective intern. You get different treatment. You get sweatpants treatment over here with me.
Nothing wrong with that.
Well, I'm trying to make this so it doesn't turn into Red Mage, Blue Mage, which is a show that you and I do together on Geekspective.
That's true.
Talk about that.
Yeah, so Red Mage, Blue Mage is a podcast about Magic the Gathering. It is a variety show. We do all kinds of things on there. Our normal show is you and me talking about Magic. We typically do a couple segments, like we'll talk about the Magic story, what's going on. We'll pick out some of our favorite or least favorite cards. We give each other a lot of static. I was going to use a different word, but that's how we talk on the other podcast. Here, we try to keep it clean. But if you want to hear me and Amber cut loose, go check out Red Mage, Blue Mage. And there you get really, I think, heightened versions of us, where it's our normal dynamic still, but you are truly embracing your goblin ways, and I am truly embracing my stuffy, overwrought, overthinking ways.
I mean, if it's any indication of my tone change in this episode as being a host, just imagine, like, I'm not even hosting really a show. I'm just showing up with a cup of coffee and the vaguest idea of what's happening, and that is Red Mage and Blue Mage. But we started it because
it just was born out of we wanted to do a project together.
Sure, and I was just getting back into Magic the Gathering.
Yes, which I was very, very excited about. And we talk a lot of Magic anyway, so it's like, podcast, done.
But before being Geekspective's #1 intern, before us making Red Mage, Blue Mage, there was a Kenny that did not exist in my mind. Time, space, you were not even a concept I could even fathom. And I'm talking like this because I know I'm steering this question into the games world. I've loved hearing these stories from you about like your love of games and how you got into games and like kind of like the progression into, TTRPG stuff. So take it away, Kenny. Tell us about your life.
Okay. So I am the oldest kid in a family of 4 kids, which when I was growing up, I was under the impression that was a small family, which, that is not everybody's experience. No, she's shaking her head, saying no. And that's something I had to learn as I grew up, because in my mind, it was super small because my dad comes from a family of 6 kids and my mom comes from a family of 14 kids. So in my mind, families are huge, and we had this tiny, neat little family. That wasn't the case. But what we did have, we had 2 parents who thought video games were the devil and would rot out our brains. And we had huge swaths of time to kill, and we had a big basement, and we had a huge backyard, and it just was a playground for coming up with games. I was thinking about this earlier today. The first game that I ever played that felt like a transition from, I'm playing games, to this is a game, this has structure, this has something behind it, was Monopoly.
Oh.
Just it's not a good game. Like, I'm not here to defend the design of Monopoly, but as a young kid playing it, it's when I gained gaming sentience, where I was like, there's a strategy here. There's a best thing I could be doing in this situation. And I started thinking about it as a game, as a structure that you could analyze.
And this was when you were 2 years old?
Yeah. So I had not spoken yet, but I was folding paper in Monopoly. No, I would try to get my siblings to play Monopoly all the time, and it's still a good expression of how I feel about gaming. Speaking of Magic, as the resident Blue Mage, I like zero-sum games where my victory means the suffering of those playing with me. which is good and all, but it also means that your siblings won't play games with you if that's how you're gonna to act. So it went from there. Played a bunch of other games. The biggest thing as growing up was inventing games. That was my first time putting on the design hat, is making up games for me and my siblings to play. So just a few examples. We had a game called Senseless Violence, which
every time I hear it, it makes me laugh. Well, because it's funny, because it's interesting. Just pin that real quick, because I think it's just hilarious how kids, not all kids, but a lot, seem to have these games where it's just beating each other up.
Yeah.
And we had one growing up, me and my brother, who plays on Tales from Moxbury, another Geekspective actual play podcast. And the game that we had was with my dad, and it was called Beat Up the Kids. So, it's like we're running around the house going, Dad, beat us up. Beat up the kids. Let's play Beat Up the Kids. And it's like, out of context, it sounds so terrible. But anyway, senseless violence.
Does. Yeah, I mean, you can guess what the game is about. It was like, everybody has to have played this game. I'll put that in quotes. It's not a game. It's just play, where you have pretend weapons, or in our case, actual weapons like wooden sticks and glass shards and shurikens. No, we didn't have all that. We had like wooden sticks and like foam swords, and we cut little shurikens out of plastic ice cream lids. Quite dangerous, of course. Don't do this.
Yeah.
Legal disclaimer. As the resident intern, I must say, do not try this at home. But you would just pretend fighting with each other. And I was like, how do we turn this into a game? And then started to overlay some rules on top of it. And that was another big kind of realization to me, is that play is fun, but play is different than a game. Like, just doing something fun is different than when you start imposing a little bit of structure onto it. And the thing I loved the best was trying to figure out, what is the fun thing here? And how do you introduce enough structure to enhance that fun without wrecking it? Because at some point, you can introduce so much structure that it ruins the thing that was fun about just playing.
Right. So for senseless violence, what was the rule structure? Did you have rules?
The rule structure, it was very light, and it just had to do with a wounds system. Like, after so many hits, you had to basically go to a respawn area to get your health back, to come back into the fray. And so it was just a King of the Hill style game. Whoever could stay out the longest. And that's where the game comes in. Now you're not just swinging and having fun throwing things. Now you're trying to be the person who stays out on the field the longest. And that was the game element.
This is interesting because you had no video game experience.
Very limited, I would say.
Okay, and then the other thing is, is this preschool? Like, is this going into elementary school? You're just making up games with your siblings, or did you also have the experience from like elementary school and playground play?
I would say it was after playground play.
Okay. The reason I'm asking is because I recently, and by recently I mean last night as of this recording, put on Netflix. I needed some mind-numbing noise, a show to put on. And they have a Wipeout-like show, if you know what Wipeout is, where it's like an obstacle course game. But they have one called The Floor is Lava, which is super interesting in concept. I like it. It wasn't that great to watch. It wasn't very funny, and some of the some of the players were kind of annoying.
But there's a good idea there.
Yeah, and also like I'm sharing this with Kenny because it's part our catch up today talk, yeah. Where there is the lava is actually some sort of viscous liquid that they have like proprietary licensing over. It's gross. Somebody said it was like
Nickelodeon.
Yeah, like they're the slime or gap or whatever. Yeah, it's sounded like that, but it's the lava. And a contestant or a host said it's similar to like the glaze on like orange chicken or like sesame chicken and stuff. I know. I was like, I can't play this game because I would not be able to touch it.
Yeah, you and I both have an aversion to disgusting
on like my
tactile
hands.
Yeah.
And so to imagine me falling, because surely like within the first attempt to do anything in this obstacle course, I would just eat it and just fall into
Yeah, of course.
But I like that. I think it's interesting how this play aspect, like the floor is lava, feels like it's like every kid knows this game. At least
of course.
in the experience of maybe, United States, American, that kind of stuff.
It's such a weird idea because there are these were memes before they were memes. And I don't mean like, GIFs and images like that. I mean memes in the sense of ideas that propagate. Like the floor is lava is a thing that existed when I was a kid in the 90s. But how did it propagate? There wasn't an internet to check out these things. Anyway, that's a total tangent. But yeah, other games that we played, I made an American Gladiators obstacle course in our backyard for us kids because every summer we would just watch that on repeat. And so there was like there's a Nerf course that was supposed to represent the little obstacle course where you're being shot at. We had 2 giant like industrial barrels that my dad had for some reason. He would stand on that with pillows and try to knock each other off. That was good fun. And then probably the most famous game that I came up with that we still play every once in a while to this day as grown adults is Jurassic Park. And in this game, this was before I knew what these words would mean, but it was like an asymmetric monster game where one person, me, I would play as the monster, the Velociraptor, and my siblings would play as the people trying to survive. And what they had to do is get from our house all the way through our backyard, over a bridge, over a creek, through the woods, and to a little shed that we had on our property. And I made a little Lego switch in there, which is you turning the power, cycling the power back on. And they would give me time to hide. So they would be in the house, and I would hide somewhere in the yard, and they would come out and try to get to the shed without me tagging them, getting to them. And of course, I was a little kid. I was like prowling around as a Velociraptor. I'd start making noises, and from the retelling of it, it was as if an actual Velociraptor was coming to rip them to shreds. The terror was real. And that was like, it's a great game. It was a great concept. And they had Nerf guns, so they had like tranq guns, basically. So you got one shot that could make me freeze for a little bit. When you got to the shed, you got to reload, plus you got a Nerf bazooka, so you could actually take me out if you got to the shed. But it really was like a precursor to being a GM where I was not trying to win necessarily. I was trying to make a fun event for my siblings. And it was about the experience that you're creating rather than clearing some objective or obtaining some objective.
So then getting into actual TTRPGs then, when did that happen for you?
A long time later. So I went from enjoying games as a kid, making up games with my siblings, to eventually, like, Magic was really the stepping stone into true geekdom, I feel like, which I picked up in high school, which now, instead of just a game that I'm playing with my siblings, now it's this broader community and this broader world. It's like taking my first step into a wider world, right? And I played Magic for several years after that. And then within this geek circle, I had heard of Dungeons and Dragons before. Someone, like a drug, its proffer is like, hey, you want to try some Dungeons and Dragons? And I eventually got weathered down. For the longest time, I was like, look, I'm a nerd. I know it. But I'm no D&D nerd. I'm not playing one of those role-playing games.
It's just so funny because you and I both have the similar experience into like, no, I like anime, but like I'm not a Dungeons and Dragons nerd.
Yeah. It just keeps getting pushed back. Now it's like I'm still kind of in the space of, yeah, I mean, I play D&D, but I'm not a LARPer, all right?
Yeah,
I'm
but
I'm not a nerd.
Oh, please.
Well, I mean, I have, but that's not me.
I mean, I might have played like 10 or so LARPs, but I'm not a LARPer.
It's so true.
Shut up.
It's so true. But yeah, I played that first game of D&D, which the first time I played it, it was like the most milquetoast D&D experience you could have. It was very traditional, like walk into a tavern, some goblins are there, there's a fight, somebody hires you for a job, you go into a swamp, there's a dragon. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I remember playing it and not getting it. Not just D&D, but the whole role-playing game thing. Because I was like, this is not a game. This doesn't feel like a game to me. You're just making this stuff up. Why would I do this? What's the goal? What's the objective? Which is funny because, as the story I was just telling a bit ago was emphasizing the whole idea of it's not necessarily about winning or completing an objective or being super structured necessarily. So it took me some getting used to and playing some more and listening to more. And what really, I think, converted me from this is interesting to this is cool and I like it was listening to the original Acquisitions Incorporated podcasts from Penny Arcade and PvP and really seeing what it could be, like how far you could take it.
Hey, Kenny.
Hey, Amber.
I have a question for you.
All right, shoot.
Of all the planeswalkers, which one's butt do you want to touch the most?
Let's go with my gut. Karn. That ass is sculpted. Literally. Speaking
of butts, you better believe this is Red Mage, Blue Mage. Kitty, I'm really bad at this. That's our awesome Magic the Gathering podcast on the Geekspective network. Oh my god, I can't stop laughing.
And neither can you. When you're listening to us talk about magic and lore and how to build commander decks and Oathbreaker decks and us actually playing against each other, which is my favorite part.
Right, and you can hear us do all these things on Spotify, iTunes, or other major platforms like YouTube now as well.
And you can also send dank memes at us, dank magic memes at RedBlueMTG. We're down for that,
yeah,
sure.
The danker the better.
That's what I always say.
All right, bye. So from the, paint by numbers D&D experience to listening to the podcast, did you ever end up finding a gaming group to play with? Like, I can't remember this myself, and I'm sure you've probably told me, so I'm legit asking again. Like, I don't remember that transition.
Yeah, so the initial experience was like friend of a friend. I'm going to hang out with my friend. My friend is going to play at this other person's house, so I'm tagging along for the ride. And it was very much of, this is a lark. I'm playing D&D, and just played a couple of games there. Then, this would be like senior year of college, I had a friend group, finally established a friend group that I was a part of, a bunch of nerds who really hadn't played before. And there was one guy who took the lead and was like, I want to be dungeon master. I want to run a campaign. Who all wants to give it a try with me? And that first semester, we all gave it a try, and it was a hugely unwieldy group. It was like 10 players or something. Oh, God.
No, thank you.
But I get why he did it. He was trying to just give a taste to everybody, because most of us had not played. I had barely played. And it was like, who is it going to stick with? So we played that first little bit, only played, 8 sessions or something like that in that semester. But then in second semester, most people dropped out, but like 4 people stayed in. And those 4 people became the group. And I was really into it at that point. And this GM, Joel, he said, have you listened to these podcasts? And he pointed me to the Penny Arcade Inc. stuff.
There we go.
And I started listening to those, and I was like, wow. And it really taught me the game even more than playing it, because I just listened to them obsessively. And really saw, you and I both like the same thing in our actual play podcast, which is being a fly on the wall, just listening to people's real play experiences and their friendships and their relationships. And that's what it felt like completely to me, and that's what I really dug. And so basically that next semester, we made a campaign where we were trying to do our own, the adventuring company, which is the whole idea of acting. It's the adventuring company as a company, like as an incorporation. And so we established a company in Waterdeep. Our company name was Cloak and Dagger, and the idea is we are like the sophisticated, like high, like heavy skill work team. Like you don't hire us for anything; you hire us for the Lux jobs, you know. And that was really the first dive into it. And then from there, grad school time. I was working with a cohort of other grad students, introducing on the first day. One of you and I, our mutual friend Lily, said, as like the icebreaker, getting to know you fact, I love Dungeons and Dragons. And I was like, really? Huh, interesting. And then, of course, what happens? Everybody just cascades, and we find out there's like 5 or 6 people who want to play role-playing games. Started playing a bunch of different games, board games too, because we especially had a couple friends who were much more board game geeks than role-playing game geeks. And I dig board games too. Then another big transitional phase in that is, again, friend of a friend came down and said, I would like to run Tomb of Horrors for your friends. And this is Cirsa Victory, who we've had on the show, who has been on Table Top Babble multiple times, is known for a lot of things, but especially the fourth core idea, movement, whatever you want to call it, of Death Trap Dungeons in 4th edition. And that's what Tomb of Horrors was. It was his adaptation of Tomb of Horrors into 4E. First time I've ever played a Death Trap dungeon. Didn't super care for it on a first experience. Played again with Revenge of the Iron Lich. Didn't care for it because I just felt like, oh, my decisions don't matter. I remember going through the entirety of one of these adventures, getting to the end, finding it's the final boss, and the final boss had a move where if they crit with a particular move, they just cut your head off with a razor that they shoot across the map. And I got crit on. After everything we've done, I come in here, I'm dead. Just don't get to do anything. And so I was like really like irritated with this game, but at the same time, I couldn't put it down. I couldn't stop thinking about it. And that kind of snowballed into my designer phase, which is trying to make cool, fun Death Trap dungeons.
So I'm getting a little bit excited over here because this is actually how Kenny and I ended up meeting and knowing of each other. So Cirsa also I had met at a Gen Con, and we found out that we actually lived in the same town, and so Cirsa and Lily were how I met up with actually you. And so I ended up playing in a lot of games with Cirsa and Lily, and also at that time it was me, I don't know, letting my hair down with role-playing games. Like, right. I was really growing as a role player at this time. And one of the first actual plays, or one of the couple first actual plays I ever was on, was a game written by you.
Yeah. Colossus of the Shattered Moon. Memories.
Yeah, all alone in the moonlight. No, it's how was it like listening to a group of people play your game?
It was awesome. I think it might not have been literally the first time listening to someone play one of my games. But it was the first like real time, as in proper recording and like somebody I trust and with the game material. It's funny too. I don't know if you know this. So that adventure, Colossus of the Shattered Moon, I wrote in a day as just a fun challenge to make a 1-day system agnostic module, basically. So it's not built for any.
I didn't know that.
Not built for any system. And so Cirsa was not playtesting it so much as picking it up and saying, hey, there's this cool new game that I'm playing. I want to adapt it for this new system, and adding some stuff as well. And so it was fun for me for multiple reasons, seeing people play a game that I wrote, seeing how somebody else picks up and adapts, especially because Cirsa was a big inspiration on my style. So it was fun for a lot of reasons. And then hearing how the players, like you, rose to or failed to rise to the challenges in the dungeon was so fun. And it was a great encapsulation of my favorite thing, designing games, which is when players either anticipate or don't anticipate something in the game, like a trap or a puzzle, and after it's revealed what the answer is, or it's revealed what the trap is, going, oh, how did we miss this? Where it seems obvious. That to me is good design right there, rather than something happening and being like, where did this come from? Like, being able to make the connections either before or after the fact, that's cool to me. And there were numerous examples of that in your run through.
Oh yeah, I want to hear. Do you remember?
Yes, I do. So I'll try to censor myself, or maybe you can bleep this for the show.
Okay.
There was one in particular toward the end of the game. So the real basic backstory: on the moon, there was a lich who lived there. He was destroyed at some point, but he's coming back, so the players have to go get him, and his name is the Crimson Hand. And you're seeing clues about that everywhere. There's like on the wall writing that says the Crimson Hand lives, etc., etc. Anyway, players get to the last chamber. There's a destroyed colossal statue laying in fragments on the ground that's been like splattered with red paint. In particular, there's a giant hand on the ground, and it gets described several times. And you all walk in, activate it, it rises like Master Hand from Smash Brothers and starts beating you all to death. And Sursa, like, everybody's just like, oh man, this is not good. And then Sursa finally describes it as this Crimson Hand rises, and everybody, you say, we are the stupidest pieces of shit in the world.
I remember that, but I also remember vaguely, and this is what, going on 8 years ago now?
Yeah.
8 years. I remember specifically, it was like the first session where we crossed this bridge, and it's described to us as a bridge made of like skeletons and bones
skulls.
And skulls.
Specifically skulls.
Specifically skulls is dropped. And we get to, I don't remember, and you can help me with this. We get to this area where we are, we're trying to solve a puzzle, and the solution is to put a skull in a in place of something. I can't remember.
Yeah, there's basically like a slot. You uncovered some device that has a slot that has an indentation of a skull. You need to put a skull in this thing.
And I don't remember what we did. Were we like trying to craft a skull?
Yeah, you were like
conjure a skull.
You were telling backstory, like doing flashbacks, basically, of like, oh, I have this moldable clay that I can turn into, and then one of you was like, oh, I got a prize from one of my recent kills is a little turtle skull, and
and then like after we solve it, I remember
you got 2 skulls and you needed a third, and so I was like, what do we do? I don't know, let's make a move to see if we can remember some lore. And then Sursa says something like, you get a vision of the skull bridge behind, something like that.
Oh, we're so dumb. I still maintain we're the dumbest pieces of poop. We are idiots. Oh well, whatever. But it leaves for good moments. I love that kind of stuff. So like you're saying, like you had written stuff to be connected, so it didn't seem out of place, and it's more like face in palm. Wow.
Yeah.
Which is fun for me too. Like when I'm playing games, it's fun to solve things. It's fun to be right, but it's often more funny to be like bumbling fools, essentially. Yes,
absolutely.
So where did this idea come from? Because that's one of the things I've never really talked to you about, Kenny. You know, we talk a lot about character stuff. We talk a lot about like just games we're playing and we're interested in, but I've not really talked to you about like your writing inspiration and like your process. So I guess we could start with the Colossus of the Shattered Moon. Like what spurred you to create that? What was the impetus of it?
I think the biggest thing for me is having some kind of constraint, whether that be the seed of an idea and or some writing constraint. So literally for that one, it was just I had, for some reason, I got in my head that day. I can remember vividly like what that day was like. It was a Sunday. It was summer, windows open. a warm wind coming in the house. Football was on, and I think just on Twitter at the time, there was just a thing going around about these real quick dungeons that you do in a day, and I was like, I wonder if I could do that, basically. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I just sort of put out a request, give me a name of a dungeon, not an existing one. And somebody threw out a few details I think I pieced together into Colossus of the Shattered Moon. And I was like, what is that story like then? And having those constraints really helps me. And that's still true today, currently working on a module that was, I just came up with an initial idea, which was based on trying to come up with a cool idea for an objective for a mission. Because, there's, get the thing from the place, escort person here, like there's all these basic types. And I got interested in the idea of like a burial rite, like just laying someone to rest if that's the adventure. And that combined with a few other like specific ideas, that's just the seed. And then from there, I think I'm best at punching things up, detail work, elaboration. So I just need something to start with that I can start punching up. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, it makes sense. It's just like, for me, I'm like, I have a hard time, and you know this of me, just sitting down and doing the damn thing. And I'm kind of impressed and like inspired by the fact that you have done that multiple times. I mean, I'm inspired by everybody who writes a game to me is like, what kind of superpower is that? It's above me. I mean, I could do it.
Yeah.
It's just that I don't focus a lot on it. So I don't know where this question's going. There's no question. Talk to me.
I think that's how I have to do it. I like a lot of people, if I'm working on a project for a really long time, I definitely lose steam. And so for me, the best way to do something and accomplish it is to sit down and hammer away at it till it's done. And I have the thing where it's in my head and I just need it to be gone. And so it's more just like that style of writing for me is just a way to deal with how ideas sit in my head anyway.
So you wrote Shattered Moon in one day as a fun thing to do 8 years ago. What have you been up to since? Like, what has happened since then? Tell me in great detail every year, month by month, day by day,
Lord.
hour by hour.
So there's a time where I put out modules for 4th edition. So I wrote Murder of the Maelstrom Queen, where there is a Medusa. It's like a subterranean Medusa lady who is going to rise from the oceans with her Kraken army and destroy the world. Some heroic adventurers killed her, but every 13 years she rises and you have to go and you have to kill her again. That was like it was another project where it's just like, I wanted to see if I could do it. Could I write a short, focused Death Trap dungeon, make it thematic? And I think I did a good job with it. There's some of the stuff I wrote in that early adventure is still some of my favorite stuff. There is a brain, which is a common thing I come back to. There's a brain monster in there where if you try to defeat it, you just can't. You cannot fight this thing. You can, but it's hard work. And what it actually wants you to do is to tell it a riddle that it hasn't heard and doesn't know the answer to. And the key to beating it is to give it a riddle that is logical in some way. Because if you give it logic, it knows everything. So that's not going to work. That monster and that puzzle in particular, I still really like. I wrote another adventure called Vault of the Worm Prince, which I think no one knows about, really.
I'm like, I've not heard of this.
But it is really funny because that was the adventure I just put out. I was like, here, have this if you want it, that I made. And Sursa's first got in contact with me and was like, hey, this is cool. And I was like, thanks. I just tried to distill what you were doing down, basically. After that, I played a bunch of 4E and got increasingly fed up with it because it's so clunky and hard to write for. You have to do so much work to make combat blocks in 4E. I have nightmares. And so my home game turned into more and more of a homebrew and a hack of 4E until it got to the point of like, why am I still playing this particular game? Surely there's something else that's better out there. And so that's when I started writing for Dungeon World. Very similar, where I was like, every time I come into a new game system, I'm like, but can I Death Trap dungeon it? And so I wanted to make a Death Trap dungeon just to try it out and stretch my legs, which turned into Fortress of the Mage, which is definitely the most complete thing that I've made.
Which I experienced also. And I have some really good fun memories about that game. A lot of my early... It's so funny to think that my role-playing blossomed in Death Trap dungeons.
Isn't that funny?
It is pretty funny. To think that I would don these characters and be ridiculous characters in a game where that character is going to, like, most likely die within the first, 100 feet of the dungeon,
You can really relax when that's the case, though.
I think maybe that's probably why. I think knowing that I didn't have to, there wasn't a pressure to continue to perform this character. I could just be a silly thing, go in, oops, there they go, down into a vortex of poison. It's fine with me. Roll up another one. It's the same character, but even sillier.
I know one of your favorite quotes about this stuff is treat characters in a one-shot like a stolen car.
Oh yeah. Like, you're going in, you're probably never gonna see this character again. Most likely,
free permission to just go all out.
Oh, I know, because like, I think you're probably going to talk about is Maze of the Elder Brain after Fortress of Mage? Yeah. Okay, so brain theme is strong with Kenny.
Yeah, brains, eyeballs, like there's a lot of common themes here.
It's why you're the blue mage.
Yeah, I guess so.
But I was to say for Maze of the Elder Brain, which is a one shot, you ran it, actually.
I did, yeah. It was the first time I ran a game for you.
First time you ever ran a game for me.
I was going to say, before we press on here, you're saying it's funny you're thinking about how you sort of grew up in tabletop role-playing in Death Traps. I think it's funny. I hadn't really thought about this, how much of my games you played when you were jumping into the scene, really.
Kenny, you are fostering my growth and development as a young role player from afar with your magical dungeon words. So yeah, I've played a lot of your games, used a lot of your character sheets, and then what I want to talk about with Maze of the Elder Brain, which I really, really enjoyed. I just remember because Josh was playing in it too, and Josh is very much he would do things by the book. He's the kind of player, at least in Death Trap dungeons, that would very much try to unlock all the achievements and do things right. And I'm like, no, I'm going to stick my hand in this mouth.
Yep, I remember that.
And Josh was like, I was like, well, I'm going to try to dispel this creature or this giant mouth thing that was like all sorts of, like, again, Kenny theme. Lots of shapes, space and time and numbers and things, and I couldn't really truly perceive this entity, and I was trying to dispel it because I figured it was some sort of magic. And as I was trying to reach in and grab like the magical components of it because of whatever fiction I made up, I failed.
And your hand bit off.
And Josh looked at me so side-eyed. I was like, whatever, I don't need this hand. I'm not going to live this dungeon. Did we have fun? Is this a story we're all going to remember when I put my hand inside an unknowable beast? Yes.
That's right. And it's the way it was written, too, is that's a solution. Because what the mouth wanted was meat, I think. And yeah, that's one way to do it.
My hand was a drumstick made of turkey. No problem. But I think it's fun. It's like, so why do you feel so strong? Like, why are you drawn to Death Trap? Because even now you're preparing for a Geekspective Presents one shot and Inside of Knowledge. it's gonna be a death trap.
Yeah, surprise. I think it goes back to the beginning of our conversation. It goes back to me being a kid doing a thing that's like fun play and thinking, okay, but how could I introduce some structure to really amp up the fun? Or going back to the first time playing Dungeons and Dragons and thinking, this isn't really a game. Death traps appeal to me in part because for my personal tastes, they add the right amount of game element to it. I like going into something and being free to be wacky and do all kinds of things, but also I am kind of like Josh. I mean, there's a reason Josh likes death traps too. I like feeling like I've overcome something and I've accomplished something in a game. And when it's totally loosey-goosey story, it's just a different experience, right? You can feel like we've told a good story, but you don't feel like I achieved victory this day. And I think that's a big part of what appeals to me.
So that's interesting because it leads me to this next question, where I, for the first time ever, got to play in a campaign run by you, and I know it went against your usual style
very much.
And this was a non-content, like it wasn't recorded anywhere. Kenny's friends and I playing a 1 hour a week, silly game.
Very silly.
What was that? What experience was like knowing what you are and knowing what that game was? And you could elaborate on what that game was if you want to, but like, how was that for you? Was it a good time, or did you feel like it was lacking?
It was definitely a good time. I think one of the big values for me was it was just a good mental stretch for me to try to do something that was so different to what I normally do. I definitely made bigger gains, I think, in my role playing and improv than I had before. I tend to, and I still do think I do my best work when I have prepped extensively. And the nature of this game was there's not much prep, and the prep that you do, there's a 90% chance that none of it will be relevant to what the players actually do. We had a long segment of the game where you and the other players were on a flying airship trying to get to an island to achieve some goal.
Taffy Island?
No, you're going to the IRS.
Oh, yeah, okay.
It's a long story, everybody.
I wish it kind of existed in content, because there was at least one session that, you know, they're hour long. We laughed and cried for like a good 20 minutes of it.
Yeah. But you were trying to get to this island, and you were in this airship that was owned by a rival group. And about halfway through your journey, you're like, why don't we just kill all of these rivals and take over the airship and go somewhere else? And so all of this work I had done on an excursion that's going to happen once you get to the island is thrown out, which is fine. Like I said, it's good for me to extend in this way. Do you want to give the basic premise that we came up with? Because basically we sat down the first night.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't have anything in particular in mind, and we just kicked around ideas.
It was a really interesting, fun dynamic, right? Because one, all of your players, which were two of your close friends, your brother, who I hadn't really interacted with much at all before. Yeah. You as a GM who likes to, like you said, extensively prep. And then me, the wild card, who's been role-playing for a long, long time because the other three hadn't really been role-playing that much.
Right.
And we're used to your extensively prepping style. And then you throw me into the mix, and it's just like, it was both nerve-wracking for me because I didn't know the group very well, but also I can't help but be a goofball. And so we ended up making this world where every so often these giant extra dimensional creatures show up, and we made these guilds, and there was a whole big plot about these monsters that was actually being controlled by Big Sugar, because Sugar was the corporation. Like, the whole world was run on candy and sugar sales and that kind of stuff. And so there was an island called Taffy Island that is where Billy Bonka ruled, and we did a very much a session 0 where this was all being come up. So like the Madres. The mothers,
those are the monsters, yeah.
the monsters, the sugar crystal monsters, were made up by like your brother Matt, and other stuff like the guilds were coming up between me and Troy, and then Jaren was making up all this robot stuff about the world, and it was really fun and really silly. And I don't know, it for me it felt good. For me it felt natural. The whole thing felt good and natural. So if you ever felt like weird about it and like bad prep and like didn't feel good, every session I had a wonderful time.
I had fun too, and I'm glad it was enjoyable. But yeah, there were definitely a lot of sessions I walked away from being like, whew, I could have done so much better. But it's just because I just feel comfortable with doing the work, doing the prep.
Yeah, I get it too. I think I've talked about this on Twitter, and if you follow me on Twitter, and you look in my GM stuff and the way I talk about RPG is like being a socially anxious person, my stuff comes from making sure that everyone's having a good time, everyone's fun, that I know enough about the world that I feel comfortable moving in it. If a player asks me a question or wants me to be a NPC, and I tend to write a lot prior to a session, usually 2 to 3 A5 pages worth of information, and I know that you're that way too, but more so.
Yeah, I think I do my best. Like when it comes to a character, it's good that I'm practicing improv and adding that to my toolkit, but my best characters come from really thinking about it ahead of time.
Yeah, I get you. It's just nice to have that. And it's not so much prepping for like the roles and stuff. And I also don't like prepping so hard that you predetermine the path and you don't know what to do, but just be open to the other players' decisions. Like you said, we totally would go make complete 180s
yeah
on you
by design, if that was welcome.
Yeah. So Kenny, what lies ahead of you? What is the future of games for Kenny? You got anything planning? You excited about anything? Or even for Geekspective, anything you want to talk about? This is your time.
Well, I think the thing I'm most excited for is, you already mentioned it, but the Geekspective Presents game that's going to be coming up, where I'll be running a game of Quest, a Death Trap Dungeon for a lot of cool people, yourself included. And yeah, it feels good to be jumping back into writing a module, writing a death trap, because I haven't really done it in a long time. I was thinking about this earlier today. I'm always doing something creative, but it doesn't take a lot to fill up my creative bucket. Whereas for you, you're like you're like Hamilton. It's like, why do you make content like you're running out of time kind of thing? That's you.
Yeah, I don't I'm not a good example of how to be.
But yeah, for me, it's like just a handful of things goes a long way. And so mostly what I've been working on is, Red Mage, Blue Mage. I do have some other role-playing things. It's like I have things that are basically done, and I would like to get made into a thing that I can put out there into the world. You and I have talked about this. So I have a Dread murder mystery that is basically done as far as the writing goes. I have a Tower of the Ascendants, which is a mini-level death trap dungeon I started ages ago. It's supposed to be 10 levels. The first level is like really polished and good. The second level is nice. The third level is okay. And then it kind of descends from there. What's done.
Well, speaking of ascendance, it's time for me to ascend into a hole in the ground and go to bed. Wait, no, it's descend into a hole. This hole is above me. I gotta go. This podcast has to end. You guys have gotten a rare and exclusive Tabletop Babble treat of Amber as Red Mage, Blue Mage, as the Red Mage on Tabletop Babble. I can't help but talk like this when I'm around Kenny. I don't know why. Hey, if you liked listening to Kenny and would like to listen to more of Kenny and also me, check out Red Mage, Blue Mage.
Definitely.
It's seriously it's such a fun time. I love the bits that we do, and me being a ridiculous goblin and then you just being the straight man to it is excellent. And you get more of the this flavor of amber. But Kenny, where can people find you? And tell us that. I'm real good at ending podcasts.
You can find me on Twitter at Wolfmere, Red Mage Blue Mages at Red Blue MTG, and I have many projects that exist or are in the works on Geekspective.com.
You don't want to announce them yet?
Should I?
You can do whatever you want.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm working right now on a podcast called The Intangibles with my brother Matt, who we mentioned before, which is about what if you take video games very seriously, but you're also not that good at them. And then I have another podcast called Watching Movies that I'm working on with my sister, where guess what? We watch movies and we make fun of them.
I love it all. And I love that Geekspectives, you're pulling in your family now into Geekspective.
I'm telling you, it's a worm tongue play. Eventually it'll just be my family. This Geekspective.
All of us will be the interns and we'll be bringing you
bring me my
ideas and grapes and fanning you with our giant Geekspective fans and all that jazz. So anyway, thanks for coming on the show. That was fun. It was
my pleasure.
It was like we recorded a Red Mage Blue Mage episode.
It was. Maybe I'll just steal this audio and put it up there.
Yeah, we'll just put it on the Red Mage Blue Mage feed as well.
Genius.
Perfect. Mwah. Double content, 2 feeds. I don't know. Efficiency, synergy, business.
Profits.
Bye. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the show. You can find me on Twitter at Rocket Orca, Kenny as at Wolfmere, and John is at Crossways GM. Tabletop Babble is part of the Geekspective Network. Go to Geekspective.com to check out all our other shows or follow us on Twitter at Geekspective. Our theme music was provided by the Battle Bards.